Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to welcome everyone to this program in celebration of Constitution Day, the day that our nation should be coming together to commemorate the signing of our Constitution 234 years ago. And I want to thank formally Professor Simpson and Shuin from political science and from law for spearheading today's event. This is one of the great benefits of having UIC law in the family, having some great constitutional scholars, and we'll take every opportunity to share their wisdom and hear their wisdom with the entire community. One of the most significant aspects of our mission is to promote public service and civic engagement. This is part of our DNA. We are recognized as one of the most diverse university communities in the nation, and we're serving as a mirror into Chicago's neighborhoods and local communities, a city of immigrants going back 150 years, and a city that has risen in great part through the education of its citizens. Our American history has been full of daunting challenges that we continue to face today, while striving to reach a potential that is recognized as inherent in the human rights designated to all of us in the Constitution. And this cherished document has been molded along the way since it was first signed. The Constitution, and this is my opinion, I have heard experts actually from the Supreme Court debating this, but the Constitution is and has to be a living document, continuously examined to remain relevant and current. Americans have fought over its words since the beginning politically, and unfortunately, sometimes they have fought violently. And to continue the fight today for equity and equality for all. Our students are no strangers to political and civic engagement. They're recognized nationally for being among the most civically active in the nation. They volunteer widely in their communities, and they understand the strength of their voice and their actions. And as you heard just a couple of minutes ago, they especially understand the importance of voting in a democracy. Members of our academic community are also recognized leaders dedicated to interpreting the Constitution through their research and shaping our understanding of its impact in our lives, larger and smaller impact. Later in the program, you will hear even more about leadership and civic engagement. And now was the time for me to introduce the Honorable Carol Moseley Braun. Let's get the most important part of the introduction first, right? Ambassador Moseley Braun is a proud UIC alumna, and we are very proud of her accomplishments as well. She's a former member of the Illinois House of Representatives. She's the first Black woman to serve in the US Senate, representing the state of Illinois, and she's a former US ambassador to New Zealand and to Samoa. So what we plan for her today is to talk about race and the Constitution in the 21st century, and help us trace the racial elements of the US Constitution and its several amendments, the civil rights movement, and the effects of the Constitution on race today.
Today is the day when, in 1787, the Constitution of the United States was voted on and approved by a majority of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. I am Carol Moseley Braun. Of the 1,786 United States senators, I am the first Black woman elected and have also served in state, local, and international government. Professor Simpson invited me to speak about the Constitution of the United States, and I'm happy to do so, given that he was my teacher too when I was a student at the U of I, Chicago. I hope this doesn't embarrass him. We are obviously both older than we were then, but I'm grateful to still be here today with you. Thank you for coming or for tuning in. And a special shout out to Christine Drew, a former staffer who wrote to tell me that she would join us. It is my pleasure to be with you today, and I'm very happy to reconnect. If we were in person, I would give you a pocket constitution. I've got a few of them, and actually, Professor Simpson, I can send some to you, and you can distribute them after this lecture is over. Again, I'm really sorry I'm not on my computer because I'm holding this phone and hoping that will do. This is what the pocket computer, the Constitution looks like, and I can send you a package of them. In any event, unfortunately, the Constitution is less helpful than you might expect. Not only is the language arcane, but so much of what seems obvious is not, it having been changed so much over time. At the outset, I feel obliged to tell you that I consider myself a patriot. My ancestors were slaves. The men in my family have fought in all of its wars except Iraq, and I delight in giving folks the good news about the United States. I have traveled the world, and without falling into the trap of the American exceptionalism, I sincerely believe this is the greatest country in the world. That does not preclude telling the whole truth as I know it about this country and my experiences in it. As a friend once observed, America is great when America is good. He's right. As long as we continue to promote the values the world sees as positive, we will be able to lead the planet to a better place. I mentioned being a patriot, but in truth, when John Lennon's song Imagine plays, I still get choked up. The United States got a boost when it was founded because the Europeans who came here had the benefit of free land and free labor. They stole the land from the indigenous people and stole the labor through slavery from imported Africans. As an enterprise, what better formula for success than free product and free means of production? That is to take nothing away from the European settlers' creativity and ingenuity and hard work, but we need to tell as much of the whole truth as we know about this country and its history. Add cheap labor from the working classes of the world, and it will be difficult, if not impossible, to fail. The Constitution, as we know it, is the second effort to form a government here. The Articles of Confederation, 1776, failed in large part because it could not reconcile power imbalances between the states. The Declaration of Independence was the first salvo of our divorce from England in 1776, but it wasn't until a decade later, 1787, that a constitution was finally written and adopted. It was in this context that the framers of the Constitution undertook to form a government that was unlike anything else in the world. The rest of the world still had some form of monarchy when the framers of the Constitution set about to apply the principles of the Enlightenment to the development of a new form of government for this new land. But progress is rarely linear. Even as a new form of government was being shaped, old social norms and traditions continue to play a role in how far it would stray from accepted norms. Among those norms were attitudes about people. In the common law, there is a concept called coverture, which essentially says that certain people are incapable of independent thought, agency, or decision-making. Those people included women, Blacks, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and poor people. The framers of the Constitution didn't say as much, but if you consider who was left out of the notion that, quote, all men are created equal, you can get a sense of why these exclusions happened. We are still grappling with their deliberate ambiguity. Curiously, of the exclusions based on notions of coverture, only race emerged as a touch point in the structure of the Constitution as we know it. Women, Native Americans, in some cases, poor white people could not vote, and most, if not all, Blacks were enslaved. However, the arrangements and structure of the Constitution was contorted over the status and role of imported Africans more than any other group. Two of the 3 points I'd like to leave with today are that the Constitution changes based on the times and the disposition of the people, in short, the zeitgeist or the environment in the country and the world, and that reconciling things about which the farmers were uncomfortable, slavery and the theft of Indian lands, gave rise to many of the twists and turns and irreconcilable conflicts that had to be worked through. The Constitution, as you know, is a foundational political compact for the United States. As a political compact, has undergone interpretation and misinterpretation over time. It would take longer than I have here today and probably bore you to tears to try to recount all the cases and twists and turns, not to mention amendments to our Constitution has had since 1787. Our country fought a civil war to define what it meant. And indeed, some of the arguments debated among the 42 delegates in Philadelphia are still being thrashed out. January 6, 2021 stands as Exhibit 1 in making the point that we still don't have consensus in this country about what that foundational compact really means. So as Professor Simpson asked, the question today is how shall we shape the Constitution going forward? Is race still the touch point to be avoided in polite conversation? Or have we evolved enough to be able to take all of those unsaids about humanity and, I think that's your staffer trying to call me.
Just go ahead, Carol. We can hear you, and
Okay.
your vision will come back in just a minute.
Okay, good. Have we evolved enough to be able to take all those unsaids about humanity and apply them constitutionally now? Abigail Adams, wife of John Adams, the third president of the United States and who was one of the drafters of the Constitution, attempted to shame her husband and his colleagues about the exclusion of women with her famous "Remember the Ladies" letter. Articulating the aspirations of women to be citizens with the same rights and privileges as her husband and his friends, she pointed out the obvious contradictions of a revolution ostensibly fomented to achieve the liberty of the individual, but that applied the concept only to some individuals. And I want to quote her now, do my best job to do an 18th century woman's voice. "I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." The truth is, even though the exclusion of women was an obvious contradiction of the notions of government by the people and the democratic ideals of the Enlightenment, the Constitution itself was contorted even more so by the pernicious influence of white supremacy and race. In a particularly pointed jab at Thomas Jefferson and other slaveholding Virginia patriots, Abigail wrote, again in 1796, "I have sometimes been ready to think that the passion for liberty cannot be equally strong in the breasts of those who have been accustomed to deprive their fellow creatures of theirs. Of this I'm certain, that is not founded upon that generous and Christian principle of doing to others as we would that others should do unto us." Some Southern states had almost as many African slaves as white settlers. The 3/5 rules of the Constitution was created to give the slaveholding South a leg up in terms of representation. To reassure the Southern representatives to the Constitutional Convention, a compromise was reached in which the slaves would be somewhat counted, but not given the right to vote or anything approaching full citizenship. At no time did the framers of the Constitution intend to create a direct democracy. The existence of an electoral college is testament to how much the framers of the Constitution wanted to obliterate the opportunity for all but white property-owning men to directly influence the operations of government. What the framers created was a republic in which the only level of government directly reflecting the population was the House of Representatives. The makeup of the House is determined based on the census, which the Constitution mandates every 10 years. From that data point, the seats in the House of Representatives are, quote, apportioned among the states. By contrast, and again, to placate the Southern members of the committee, the Senate has 2 members from every state without regard to population. And up till 1913, senators were chosen by the state legislatures. The next step is the Electoral College. Membership is determined at the state level based on the cumulative number of legislators, House and Senate, of the respective states. Presidents are chosen by the Electoral College. Think of it kind of as a distorted pyramid. The House of Representatives chosen by the people is for the shortest terms of office for 2 years. Then the Senate, chosen now by popular vote for a term of 6 years. Then the president, chosen by the Electoral College for a term of 4 years. At the conclusion of the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin was asked, "What have you wrought?" He answered, "A republic, if you can keep it." Most people know about the separation of power and the 3 branches of government. However, and Article 1 is, of course, the article about the legislature. Article 2 is the article about the presidents, and Article 3 is the judiciary. But the judiciary did not start out on an equal basis with the legislature and the executive. In what remains the most important case ever decided, Marbury versus Madison, 1803, Chief Justice Marshall declared that it was the court's job to interpret the Constitution and all the other laws. Nowhere in the Constitution is that power explicitly stated, but it has proved to be the single most powerful aspect of our system of government. He just announced judicial review, and it was so. The court has been called the most conservative branch of government, particularly as its members hold appointments for life or until they decide to retire. It took a civil war and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution to afford Black men the right to vote, and arguably the 19th Amendment of 1920 to give women the franchise. Note, however, that Native Americans, even in the 14th Amendment, were still not given equal access to the vote. You may know that I served as ambassador to New Zealand and Samoa and was proud to be made an honorary member of the Te Atiawa Maori tribe. I'd like to share a perspective with you that I learned from the Maori. We think of the past as that which is behind us, that which is over and done. The future, on the other hand, is that which beckons us forward. The Maori see it just the opposite. In that tradition, it is the past that stands before us. In fact, they describe the past as in Ingwa wa Omue, which translates from the times of the front. The past, after all, is what you have seen, that which you know, that which has already gone before. The future in this view lies behind you. It is, after all, unseen, unknown, unknowable, and mysterious. The importance of this change of perspective is what it means to the present. To Maori, the future will only come into being based on what you do in present time. The future is the legacy of your actions today, is the result, not just the goal of today's reality. And if in this view, we keep our eyes on the lessons of the past, not out of nostalgia or as an excuse for inaction, but as a path of instruction for our decisions in present time, the actions we take will create a better future, an improved legacy, a tomorrow more in keeping with our hopes and higher values than the past we inherited. This perspective will remind us of what we should do, what we should have learned, and give us tools with which to address the paradox of reconciling constant change and continuity of our values. The Maori would counsel that if we keep the lessons of the past before us as we make present-day decisions, the future we create cannot help but be better than the past we cannot change. Some of you will note that I've said at the outset of this talk that I have 3 points to make. I will now share the third one, and that is this. You are never too anything, too young, too poor, too powerless to make a difference. It is important to note that the framers of the Constitution were not the old men in wigs making momentous decisions that shape our lives even today. With the exception of Benjamin Franklin, they were all younger than me, and possibly you too. Alexander Hamilton was all of 21. John Hancock was 39. Thomas Jefferson, a framer but not a signatory of the Constitution itself, was 33. I think the average age, excluding Franklin, of the framers of the Constitution was about 35. And so my appeal today is a simple one. Choose to do, because the most important truth lies in knowing that whether in your personal life or in the life of your community, your work, your decisions drive outcomes. You create the future with your actions in present time. Each and every person makes a difference in shaping the direction any one person's life can take, and by extension, any one community, any one nation. As we take on our generation's issues and challenges and controversies, we help to define the battlefield on which the struggle for the future is fought. We define community today, and by our actions, our children and their children will know us. The answer lies in what individuals choose to do or not do. The key is personal. It is up to each of us to engage, to reach outside ourselves, to shape a world we will be proud to pass on to the next generation. Your choices help to create a climate of opinion about the world around us. And I like to say that climate of opinion is just like any other weather system. It depends on the hot air rising from the ground. A climate of opinion shapes perspective as well as conduct and can change hearts as well as minds. But it starts with each one of us. Sometimes in meetings like this, I wish I could see all of you on the Zoom thing, but instead I have to use my phone. But more often in small ways. Little steps, quiet interactions, personal connections, and contributions are sometimes all that's required to shape the opportunities and direction of another person or community or nation. What you say or don't say, who you say it to, whether you follow your joy or follow the crowd, all of these contribute to creating an atmosphere in which others' decisions and choices will be made. We are still in a period of transition, moving toward a new set of societal expectations and structures. And while no one can predict with certainty where this transition will go, what is absolutely certain is that it will be moved in the direction that public opinion takes it. Abraham Lincoln once said, "In this country, public opinion is all." He is still right, and it is up to us to shape that opinion and to expand the debate about civil society from what is good for me to what is good. Every person matters, and every choice you make changes the future for everybody else. The reckoning that our society is right now experiencing over race, gender, wealth, sexuality, ethnicity, all call for our contributions to decide the direction the society will move, and indeed what the Constitution will mean going forward. The Supreme Court will have the final say for reasons I've already noted, but even though it is least democratic, small d democratic, of our institutions, even the court responds to public opinion and will. Whether our society will glorify violence and greed or community and compassion will in large part be dictated by popular opinion, and popular opinion starts with you. We can popularize the notion that real education is not a private benefit or privilege of wealth, but is a public good that serves the interests of every American. It is up to each of us to create consensus that education is as much a part of our national defense as any weapon system, and that as Americans, we are committed to keep our country strong by making our people educated. The scandal of student loan debt is not only a burden on students, but a drag on our economy, and as Charles Dickens pointed out, a step in the direction of doom. We can live up to our responsibilities as stewards of the planet and of the next generation, and encourage the people to take off blinders and see a natural world that is far more wonderful and engaging than any make-believe. Deny it as they might, the reality of climate change is unmistakable. And as people lose their homes and lives from nature's inescapable fury, there can be no question that we all need to engage in a serious way around keeping our planet well and habitable. We can begin the conversation that the golden rule is a universal one, and that no distinction between Muslim and Jew, Christian and Buddhist will be allowed to divide humanity or put us in conflict with one another. We can, right here and right now, start the rumor that the people have the power to recapture the values of honesty and discipline and kindness and caring and community. Most important, we can make caring fashionable and give people confidence that what is doesn't have to be. Every person matters, and it only takes one person to light the spark for change. And even though we may be up against entrenched interests, some would say powers and principalities, with one, a tipping point will be reached in our world that will make our hopes a reality for someone someday, if not for ourselves today. The people who chose to do whatever they could to be good and decent and caring in their time put the higher angels of our nature to work in our lives, work for us. Those people may or may not be known to you personally. Indeed, they may not show up in the scholarly journals and histories of America, but I can assure you that without the many individual and sometimes unnoticed contributions of people of goodwill to make this country what it should and could be, there was no way we could be here in this place, in this way at this time. The people who went before to create our present day opportunities recognize that by doing for others, we do for self. It is up to return the favor by doing as much for the next generation. When we decide to give back just a little of the good that has been given to us, we make life better for more people than we know, than we may ever know. Thank you all for tuning into this Zoom seminar. Thank you, Professor Simpson, for inviting me. I hope I didn't bore any of you even a little bit. I'm sorry about the telephone.
We understand, Ambassador, and we thank you for overcoming all these hurdles. For people who would like to ask questions, we have 20 minutes for discussion, but we do it in a different way because there's so many of us. And what you need to do is put your question in the chat, and I will read to the ambassador the questions that come up in the chat. As we start the conversation together, Ambassador, I wonder, do you think there need to be amendments to the Constitution currently, or do you think there ought to be a constitutional convention? And what would be the dangers of any of those?
That's a very good question. And yes, of course, Professor Simpson, there should be, there's some changes, obviously, we have to make in this Constitution. But if we open the door, what worries me, I mean, I went to Washington, D.C. right after January 6th, and I saw the destruction and what people had done there and the fear that was in the air. And so my question, my trepidation and fear, you don't work out of fear, but my trepidation about a Constitution Convention is that we could very well wind up with something that's worse than what we have right now, that puts us in a really bad path. And I hope that doesn't happen. It's kind of like the devil, you know, we've got a devil right now. We've got the Constitution that we know that's been argued over for what, 200, 300 years now. So yeah, we know what this Constitution does. If we open it up to a convention, I just don't know what we'll get.
So George Nassos asks that you had said that the average age of the Constitution signers was 35, but at that time wasn't the life expectancy only 45?
Yes, it was much lower than it is now. That's correct. But I think the point I was trying to make to George, not to George, but everybody, was that it was young people that did this. I mean, the fact of the matter is that that people think of the framers of the Constitution as these old men in wigs sitting back with all this wisdom writing this Constitution. The fact is they created this document out of whole cloth. They had to make it up, and they made it up as they went, but they were young people. They were students, what now would be students, and young people who were taking on themselves the challenge of creating, again, a set of guiding principles for government in this new land. And they had questions nobody in Europe had ever had to answer, that they answered for all of us, and we're still living with their answers.
And Joel Juarez asks, what trajectory do you see in today's climate as far as our Constitution is? Where are we headed given the Constitution, and is it adequate for dealing with the climate problems today?
It is adequate for dealing with climate, but there's so many different issues that we have to take up. And again, we're going to have to make it up as we go. And the problem with that is that a lot of people have just kind of tuned out of this whole conversation. They get, we're so polarized as a country right now. And I just hope that we can overcome the polarization, inspire people to get active and get involved, and to, even if it's just something very simple on in talking about climate. I saw something today that we can affect climate change by starting to eat kelp. I don't know about you. I'm not inclined to eat kelp, but okay, that might help. We got to do something about everything from the fatberg in the oceans. We've got to do something about cleaning up our planet and making sure that we don't hurt it as we go, as we have been, not just with carbon, not just the carbon issue, but also with just using the natural resources up to the point that they don't exist anymore. They're not available for subsequent generations.
And someone you know very well, Tina Gittleson, who was your staffer in Washington, asked the question, I feel like there was more collaboration between Republicans and Democrats when we were there. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're exactly. I'll tell you, when I went to the inauguration, which was January 20th, and I got to tell you, I was stunned at the atmosphere in DC. What I saw, the place was shut down. I actually thought Joe Biden deserved better, frankly, because his inauguration was really in the context of a Washington, D.C. that was a ghost town. And I just hope that that we can get past this polarization. A lot of people are saying that part of it comes out of the campaign finance regime. And we've got Citizens United that lets corporations put as much money as they want to, and individuals put as much money as they want to in campaigns. And frankly, people it's kind of a race to the bottom. People say the most outrageous stuff in order to inspire their donors. And so I just hope that we can get past this polarization, do something about campaign finance so that we disincentivize people saying outrageous stuff and just being off the boards just so they can raise money.
So we had quite a few questions are now coming in. One of them is about what is your opinion about the possibility of expanding the Supreme Court and the benefits or the problems of doing that?
We might have to do that. Again, that'll probably take a constitutional amendment of some sort. Roosevelt tried it in the 1940s, and there was a lot of blowback. If Joe Biden were to try it now, my guess is that there'd be a similar amount of blowback, if not more. But it may be that we have to, we've got a Supreme Court. The number is stuck in time, and it may be that what we have to do is to take on the issue of expanding the Supreme Court. We may have to expand the Congress. I mean, the fact of the matter, we've got Puerto Rico, we've got Washington, D.C., that for all intents and purposes have taxation without representation. These are American citizens who don't have a representative in the Senate, at least. And part of the problem of that, obviously, is that if this is really a democracy, then to have to have a colony, two colonies, at least two colonies, is really just contradictory. And again, part of what our generation has to take up is to reconcile some of these difficulties, to see to it that women get included, that Black people, people of all colors and inclinations are invited, are included, and have a chance to be heard and have a chance to participate in making this government work.
And Mitch asks, what legislation did you sponsor as a U.S. Senator that you feel was most impactful, which was most important in that sense?
Well, I got a whole list. I got a whole little book here of bills that I sponsored that became law. The one I'm most proud of actually never got funded, and that's too bad. I tried to get the federal government to do more in funding elementary and secondary education. So my Crumbling Schools initiative just kind of passed, but it never got funded, and so it just kind of sat there. Happily, it pops up from time to time. People try to get the federal government supports less than 10% of our school budgets. And I just think that in these times, that's just irresponsible. And so that was my initiative that I was very proud of. Another on the environmental side, I did environmental equity. I also did a bill that became law that people are taking advantage of on brownfields. And so I was active in the environmental space and active also on education.
And Professor Kate Floros asks, can you speak a little about the enduring power of white supremacy in the United States and how can we best counter it?
I think by excellence, by doing. You know, the fact of the matter is there are people who have a contribution to make, but their contributions have never been acknowledged or recognized. And frankly, folks see young Black men, for example, and automatically think gangster or whatever. They don't think this might be the person with the solution to COVID. This might be the person with the solution to COVID, COVID. They don't think we haven't yet gotten over some of these unsaid assumptions about individuals. And frankly, I really think that's where culture starts. Politics comes out of culture. So we've got to work on reforming the culture so that we have equality in terms of understanding that everybody has something to contribute, and that we do best when we allow everybody to do that. And when we tap as much talent as we can, that's what will make and keep our country strong.
And Brian, building off our conversation earlier about constitutional convention or amendments, ask, based on your experience as ambassador and senator, what impact would it have if we changed our constitution in terms of our international interest in our foreign relations?
Well, I'll tell you something. One of the things that foreigners do not understand about the United States is how we pay for campaigns. At the time that I was in New Zealand, it's probably changed since then. Candidates were limited to $25,000 for an election, you know, and quite frankly, you know, $25,000 is what gets spent in an election campaign just on mail here in this country. And so I just don't know. I think we need to fix, there are a number of things that have to be fixed. Everything from the environment to campaign finance to giving people opportunity and inspiring people that they can make a difference. I think all those things can be addressed and should be addressed. And I think our Constitution gives us the ability to address them. The problem is, of course, again, we open that door to a constitutional change, and we open up to all the nutcases that I saw running around Washington when I went there for the inauguration. And it's like, okay, so do you stick with the devil you know, or you wait and you say you're gonna take a chance with the devil you don't know? And I'm frankly not a gambling person.
If we were to want to amend the Constitution, how would we go about it?
The process is there in the Constitution itself. It's a process, and it's like the Equal Rights Amendment, and it has to be passed. It has to be proposed, passed the Congress, and once it passed the Congress, then it goes to the various states. The states have to ratify or validate the amendment, and then it comes back. Once you get the requisite number of states signing on, then it becomes part of the Constitution. So the Constitution has been amended many times before. I mean, just not recently is all. And like most recent effort was the Equal Rights Amendment, which of course failed because, again, back to culture, there were people who were afraid that that the changes that were being proposed, if you listen to some of Phyllis Schlafly's comments, she was afraid of COVID, that coverture would be changed. She would say things like that women would not be supported by their men anymore. Well, you know, it's like in this time, most women actually don't need it, and or you know, will go out and support themselves. But for a generation where women could not work outside of the home, that was probably rational. It's not anymore. But there are a lot of people out here that still see real challenges to the traditional roles. And again, that's what stopped the Equal Rights Amendment. And I don't know what will stop the addition of DC and Puerto Rico, for example. That just upsets the apple cart for partisans. People, and this is a very partisan time we're living in, as you know. But they're afraid those who come into the Congress as Democratic bastions. Whether we don't know that for sure, but that's the fear. And so while it's never a good idea to legislate or to make decisions from a basis of fear, at the same time, I think we have to be thoughtful as to how we go about fixing the unsaids in the Constitution.
We have a flood of questions. Everyone wants to talk to you, even through the awkward way of the chat. But one of the good questions is, it seems that the framers worked together back then when they drafted the Constitution, but now there's so much polarization. Is there a point in time when the divide began? And more importantly, is there a way we can bridge the polarization or divide today?
Let me say that it started actually from the time that I got involved with government. And so the polarization we're seeing now is unique and unusual. And quite frankly, I think it does our country a real disservice. I hope that we can begin to have a conversation. You got to have facts to start with. You got to have a set of things you all believe, and we don't have that anymore. And it's funny. I was telling somebody the other day, there was a writer in the 1950s by the name of Marshall McLuhan who wrote a book called Understanding Media. And what he was talking about was that all the different media would accelerate the divisions between us and exacerbate the divisions between us, and would accelerate decision making, and that you'd have these wide swings from far right to far left in government. And it turns out he's right. That's what we're dealing with right now. And again, people are not on the same page, and because we're not on the same page, we have difficulty. And that, again, I go back to the Constitution. They can't even agree on what the different parts of the Constitution mean. That's a problem. That's a problem. And so I just hope that the more we can, again, as you sit in your get together your family and friends, you probably have family and friends who don't agree with your view on a lot of these issues. Well, you know, be nice to them, but make your point and make sure they understand that your point is what your point is. Again, that's how public opinion gets formed, and people respond to public opinion.
We only have time for a few more questions, but one of them is, what direction do you think education is going for the overall country? There have been recent fears among some parents that students may be being too educated about our history and how it ties into race, or not getting enough information about that. What do you think is the direction of education today?
Well, I hope that we are using the technology to give young people more information than they ever have, and more facts, more truth than they've ever gotten. I mean, when I was coming up in school, I mean, we didn't learn anything about slavery or anything about the post-slavery, about the post-slavery experience in this country. What we knew, however, was what our parents and what our families were grappling with in terms of realities. My grandfather, my screensaver is my picture of my grandfather, who fought in the First World War. I'm having to discover what happened in the First World War with the Black soldiers. We had 350,000 Black soldiers fighting in the First World War, 350,000 Black soldiers in the First World War. And most people, Black or white, don't know anything about that. And that's one of the reasons I mentioned John Lennon's song. He says, imagine that that there's no countries. Imagine that we get to the point we recognize humanity in everybody, and that we can go forward as a community together. And I think that's the role of education, is to begin to inform, to not begin, but to inform people and let them make their own decisions. Critical thinking is very important. And so I just hope that we will move in the direction of expanding information, expanding educational opportunities, and that we will fight to protect that. I mean, the problem that we got is education gets brought up at the 11th hour. And it's like the fact of the matter is that we spend more money on weapon systems than we do on schools. And that's a tragedy, I think.
So we just have time for one or two more questions. One of them is, when you were in the U.S. Senate, what kinds of racial issues were being discussed? And did bipartisan ever work to achieve, as a tool to achieve solutions to the racial problems?
Well, first off, when I was in the Senate, it was not talked about. In fact, one of the highlights, it turns out, of my Senate service was beating back a patent for the Confederate flag. And you know, in hindsight, even then, I was stunned that we were debating about whether or not there should be a Confederate flag patented. Given that the Confederacy lost the war, it seemed to me that was just, you know, like, how could this be a conversation now? Well, happily, that conversation is moving forward, and there are more people now discussing race than there were even when I was in the Senate. And I just welcome it. I welcome the conversation. I think that the more we talk about these issues that were unsaid when the Constitution was originally written, the more we talk about it, you know, we will engage a healthy debate, but the debate itself is good. And so I just think that that's the direction that we need to move in, to begin to probe these issues, to learn about them, to learn the reality, the history. And once we've done that, you can make a decision, and it can be different than my decision. But the fact is, if you have the information and enough to make the decision in the first place, then the educators will have done their job.